Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 229. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm chatting with author Lisa Diane Kastner about the first two books in her new paranormal fantasy series, Cure and Family Pack. In these books, we meet Luna, a young woman who has just lost her beloved brother. She traces his movements to Sweden, where she discovers that her family descends from an iconic female Viking warrior known as the Birke. Luna also discovers that her brother was a shapeshifter, a lycanthrope, and that she has begun to show the same signs of transformation. This series began for Lisa with a question. What if the Birke, the most famous Viking warrior, was also a werewolf? Encouraged by a friend who loved the premise, Lisa went to work writing Cure, the first book in the series, and followed it up with the sequel, Family Pack. Both books follow dual timelines and narratives, which allow Lisa's love of history and research to shine through. In this episode, I'll chat with Lisa about her writing journey, her experience getting the first book published, and her plan to publish anthologies of short stories written by fans of the series, as well as a few other things coming up. Lisa Diane Kastner, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
Thank you.
I thought what we could do today is start by talking about your new series. You have a new book out, but the newest one is actually the follow-up to your first book. So what I'd like to do is begin at the beginning. Let's start with your first book titled Cure, and then we'll work on talking about the second book, your newest, Family Pack. So if you don't mind, let's begin with Cure. Tell us a little bit about this book. And I'm curious also what inspired you to start writing this series?
Yeah, sure. So I've actually been in the writing and publishing world for well over 20 years, like maybe 25, something like that. And I'm dear friends with Jonathan Mayberry. He likes to give me credit for giving him his first keynote opportunity, because once upon a time I was the president of a writers organization that had an annual conference, and Jonathan and I were BSing one day, tossing around ideas, and I had mentioned that the most well-known Viking actually turned out to be a female. And until they discovered that she is a female, or was a female, the assumption was that all Viking warriors were men. And I was like, wow, that's really cool, right? The most famous Viking warrior is actually female. And he was like, well, what can you do with that? And so, we're again tossing around ideas, and I came back with, well, what if we had two orphans who discover not only that they are descendants of the Birke, which is that Viking warrior, but also that the Birke was also a werewolf. And he was like, oh my God, I love it. Guess what? You get to write it now. And I was like, wait, what? When did that happen? So he basically dared me. And so I said, okay, fine, I'll write it. And I knocked it out. And he was like, okay, great. Now I want to read it. And so he read it. and came back and said, you do realize this is a series. Like, you didn't just write a single book, you just wrote an entire series. And I was like, oh, okay. And one really interesting story, his first book, Ghost Road, I think it's Ghost Road Blues, that had won the Stoker Khan's Best Award for Best First Novel, he had ended up sitting next to Stephen King. And Stephen King said to him, you know, don't keep reinventing worlds. Take the world that you just created for Ghost Road Blues and basically just build upon it, keep reusing it, and it'll just make it more and more rich. So he gave me the same recommendation, right? Is that not only to create a series, but also to give others opportunities who are fans of the story to create worlds and or expand on the world as well. And so that's what gave us Cure. It also gave us Family Pack, and it's actually also going to give us, the third book is War Dogs that I'm working on now. And we're going to be publishing an anthology every other year of short stories written by fans of the world, where they get an opportunity to basically, again, you know, tell amazing stories in this specific world of werewolves and shapeshifters. And folks who read Family Pack will also discover there are other, let's just say there are other mythological beings that are going to pop up as well, and that will again expand that universe. So from a story perspective, that's really what inspired it, and that's what's getting it really kind of expanding at a rate that I hadn't anticipated. And we also another kind of interesting aside, I think, I had originally used a pen name. Again, that some dear friends kept saying, no, don't do a pen name, because, you know, you want it to be in this world of, you know, brands and, you know, people being considered like synonymous with the stories they put out. You want to use your own name. And it was really, really, really important to me that when I first wrote Cure, I actually wanted to work with my own. So I run Running Wild Press and Rise Press. And I wanted to work with my own editors because I knew that they're brilliant, right? And like, they've already won books that they've written, or not written, books they've edited have already won multiple awards, been named Best of the Year. And you know, obviously I know that we have a good relationship, but I wanted them to accept, like, if they were going to acquire the story, I wanted them to acquire it as they would just a standard submission, because I didn't want them to accept it because it's me, right?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So it was funny because I still remember the acquisition meeting we had where they reviewed it, and Stacey, I was terrified, right? Because I thought, you know, like, I've known Jonathan forever. He probably said, oh, this is great, it needs to be a series, you know, all that, you know, to be nice, because I've known him forever, right? So when my acquisition editors looked at it, they were like, oh yeah, we need to acquire this. And then it became, you know, like, well, who's going to be the editor? And I was like, wow, okay. And they didn't, I don't want to say that they fought over like who would be the editor, but it was more like, you know, whatever you want, we're happy to go with. So that's the overarching story behind not only Cure, but Family Pack and all of the additional stories that are coming out in the next like 2-3 years.
Okay. Well, let's start talking about your main characters. I imagine they have a story arc within each book, and then an overarching story arc across the series. But maybe introduce us to the characters we're going to know best once we start reading these books.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So the primary character is actually Luna Aber, and Luna Aber, her and her brother were orphans and were adopted a little bit older. I want to say like when they were like 3-4 years old. and they never really got to know their history. They just knew that compared to everyone else in their neighborhood, they were very different. It was clear they were what Americans call like multiracial, right? And so they'd always kind of felt a little bit lost, which is why her brother had actively sought out a history of like, so like, who are we, and what might our ancestry be. So Luna is the one that we're really following in the majority of these stories. And she basically starts to discover both in Cure, and it's expanded upon in Family Pack, that her background is such that she's actually considered in some ways royalty of sorts within the werewolf and shapeshifting communities. And that within the werewolf community, there are actually two opposing factions. One is they believe that werewolves and humans are to live in harmony, and the other believes that werewolves are actually, are shapeshifters and therefore are a form of God, and that humans should be basically bowing down to them. And she more so aligns, I mean, obviously, because she was raised by humans. She believes that we should all live in harmony. And because of her ancestry and her unique abilities, she is in Family Pack. We discover that she's basically made a member of those who are in charge of that faction. Two of the additional characters that they really get expanded on in Family Pack as well as in War Dogs are Chago. He's in charge of the alternate shapeshifter group, the Righteous group. And again, he believes that werewolves should, basically rule the world. And then Birke, who's kind of like, he's both her guide as well as our guide, both of the world of werewolves and shapeshifters. But he also gives us kind of like a grounding in this world, so that, as questions arise for Luna, and oftentimes they may arise for the reader, he's able to provide that context and that overarching story, to your point, that we probably wouldn't have visibility to otherwise. And Birke's basically like, I call him the librarian, because he really is the person who is keeping track of, managing, and who can provide insights into how they got to where they are today, and why there is a righteous group, and what's the intent of shapeshifters moving forward, and what brought them to the point that they're even they would think this way, right, or have these desires, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious. You mentioned that you wrote Cure, and then you were told it's actually a series.
Mm-hmm.
You're not done yet. How easy or difficult was it then to come up with a story for Family Pack, and then once again another story for your third installment? Did you have ideas kind of in the back of your mind of where you might go when you finished Cure, or was that a shock that you now had to come up with more stories?
Oh my God, great question. So I am a research nerd. And when Jonathan and I were talking and he said, this is a series, immediately I thought, it would be cool. It would be to find like lesser known aspects of historical events or people. And all the narratives are told in a dual narrative manner. So you've got one narrative, which is really Luna's, right? And that's occurring in like the 2000s. And then you have the secondary narrative, which is a historical narrative. So like in Cure, you have what's happening during the time period of the Viking Birke, and what brought us to, where we are. And then you have, Luna's story, her what you could call it more like a self-discovery. And then in Family Pack, it's basically more of the like the from 8 to 900s AD, and that's really more of the again leveraging historical events, how Chago became Chago and how Birger became Birger, and then the overarching story where Luna is basically, and without going into too much detail, but it's her continuing to try and unify the opposing factions. So since I already had the dual narrative, and this is me like speaking out on craft stuff. I thought, you know what, I could just continue that dual narrative style, right, structure. And since I am such a nerd when it comes to like historical events and stuff, just keep researching different aspects of different points in history and then leveraging that period as like the baseline for that book. So how we got War Dogs is I was researching Ponce de Leon, and I found out that during Ponce de Leon's period, they actually used dogs a lot as like the first line of an invasion. So like Ponce de Leon actually had his own dog that he took for him with every invasion they did in every country. And the dogs were basically trained to be killers. So the concept was, and this was common, by the way, it wasn't just Ponce de Leon who did this. The concept of it is to change it so that it's not just that these are dogs, but these are actually werewolves. Some of them are actually werewolf shapeshifters. And you kind of discover that, and then it expands on it in terms of them being these warriors that were being leveraged during those periods.
How much research do you end up doing then before you start writing? Or is it a case of you're researching as you're writing the story?
Again, great question. It's a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
So like it was important to me for War Dogs, for it to be more about like let's go into another country, because Running Wild, you know, I really created Running Wild in part because I knew all these brilliant writers who couldn't get book deals, and I didn't understand why. But it was important to me as well as a part of Running Wild that it's used as a way to open communication and open understanding across our own communities, right? So to kind of expand on that with the Cure series, it's been important to me to actually say, okay, what aspects of our history, of global history, of another culture, maybe we don't have as much visibility to. So how can we provide that visibility and that greater understanding through storytelling? So I start with that.
When you're researching these historical events, these historical characters, do you try to stay as true as possible to the history, or do you choose elements of it and then fictionalize whatever else you need for the story? Where do you find the balance between, is it historically accurate? Does it need to be historically accurate, or is there license to get creative?
It's more so the latter.
Mm-hmm.
So think of it as Cure. I have it based in Camden, New Jersey, and I grew up in Camden, but it's not. It's almost like as if it's another character within the story, but that environment, that location, but like none of the people within it exist. The houses that are referenced in it, don't necessarily exist, but it's based on what actually what exists today. So it's really just using it as like historical events as a launching point.
Yeah.
But trying to stay as true as possible to like how did people behave, what was done during that period, and like how did communities interact during that period.
Yeah. Yeah. So a springboard in a sense.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, did the same thing occur when you were deciding what to do with the werewolves and shapeshifters, because there's a lot of lore that comes with werewolves and any other sort of kind of, let's say, supernatural being, vampires and whatnot. There's a lot of lore around that.
Mm-hmm.
How do you decide how yours are going to behave, what yours are going to be like? Do you just make up your own set of rules and say, these are mine? Or do you, I don't know, do you scour the lore and decide, okay, generally speaking, I need to include all these things?
Uh, you ask the best questions.
Thank you.
um, so that was my initial conundrum was, okay, I researched werewolves and then I quickly realized that almost every lore has some version of a werewolf in some capacity,
Mm-hmm.
right? And oftentimes it's not like a straight up werewolf. It's really more of like a shapeshifter, right?
Yeah.
And some of them are more human like, and then switch to their, werewolf counterpart. Others could shift into more like I think there's like a Chinese, air quotes werewolf, who's really more like a combination of a vampire and a werewolf.
Mm.
And so I was like, okay, that's really fascinating. So for me, that took it a step further where, all right, so we're really talking lycanthrope. And for those who may not be aware, lycanthrope, it just means shapeshifter. It's a fancy word for shapeshifter. And since to me it was important that this was globally accessible, I didn't want it to be limited to the rules associated with werewolves based on a specific mythos, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be able to open the door so that we can introduce additional shapeshifters or additional mythological characters along the way. So that then opened the door for this not to be just a werewolf story, but it's really about shapeshifters, different forms of shapeshifters. And then along the way, like in Family Pack, we introduced the Draugr. And Draugrs are a form of vampire, to oversimplify it. But again, it's historically, or at least in mythology, there were people that believed that Draugrs were real, once upon a time. So
Mm-hmm.
it's enabling us to pull that in and leverage it within the stories.
How did your background, as editor and publisher, affect your writing? Did you find that it helped, it made writing easier, or did it actually make things more difficult?
Wow, great question. I I think it helped. So it helped me in that because I've been writing for so long, and honestly, I've been blessed. Like I've gone to so many various writers conferences and workshops, and across literary and like horror and more commercial fiction. So like the Breadloaf and the Chautauquas and the Horror Writers Association, and like I've been mentored by some of the most amazing authors like Percival Everett and Trey Ellis, and gosh, I mean, poor Chisa Kakpour, who's she kindly is still a dear friend of mine. So they taught me so many things, not only about my own writing, but how to approach writing, how to approach craft, how to approach even things like research, and taught me how to analyze pre-existing stories that I can then leverage those tools in my own writing. Like Wally Lamb had spoken. I have an MFA in creative writing, and he had spoken at my MFA, and he had written what he's most famous for is a short story collection they're linked short stories. So in reality, there's an overarching story within that brings all the short stories together. And one thing that he had said to us then was, really, if you're reading something and you are like, wow, that was amazing. How did they do that? Study it, right?
Mm.
Like analyze it, figure out how that person accomplished what they accomplished, and then you can use that in your own writing. And I don't think that I would, without the guidance and without the generosity of so many amazing authors and editors, I don't know that I could pull off the structure in Cure and Family Pack, because it's a more complex structure than you would find in like a standard story.
Yeah. Now that you've got these two books out, Cure and Family Pack, and the third one you're working on, and it will be coming out. Plus, you've
Mm-hmm.
got the sort of fandom anthologies that you're
Mm-hmm.
you're planning. What else is on the horizon for you? What other sort of works in progress or goals do you have wearing your writing hat?
Mm. So, well, the first anthology is called Incurable, and it will come out next year, I believe in October. I'm just looking it up while we're talking,
Sure.
and I'm really excited about it. It's funny when we had so Jonathan's actually the one who came up with the concept. It is called Incurable: Stories from the World of Cure. It's due out October 13th of next year, or of 2025. And, he was like, you need to do an anthology series of short stories. Just do a call, and see who comes back with stories for it. And I thought, no one's going to submit to this, right? Because I had Cure, and, I was working on Family Pack at the time. But, I'm like, one of those like, well, no one knows me. No one's read this. No one's going to, come back with anything. And we actually got a pretty decent number of submissions. I'm like looking at it now. We have 11 stories.
Hmm.
Yeah, in this short story collection. So, I'm still amazed that we have 11 really solid, amazing stories in this world of lycanthrope. So our intent is that we're going to put out a short story collection as a continuation of the anthology every other year,
Mm-hmm.
and that I'll write another novel in the Cure series, and the intent is that that's to come out every other year.
Mm-hmm.
To be completely honest, I am like 6 months behind on War Dogs. So it's coming out. I just don't, fingers crossed it'll come out in 2026. That's the objective. That said, I wouldn't be surprised if it comes out in 2027.
These things tend to happen. Yes.
They do. They do. And so I also wrote a short story for Weird Tales, and that also stands on Cure. But it sets it up so that Luna is actually the antagonist. She's
Mm.
not the protagonist. And that one was a lot of fun to write. And I'm currently in talks with Weird Tales to write another short story, leveraging the protagonist in that, who's a detective. So that'll be I'm really looking forward to that. I believe the expectation is that will also come out in like 2026. And I'm also in talks for a few other stories that are going to come out as with some other magazines as well. And we actually acquired Patrick Scott, who wrote one of the short stories in Incurable, and Jerry Purdon, who wrote one of the short stories in Cure. So they actually submitted full-length novels, kind of like an expansion on the stories that they wrote, and they were fabulous. So we accepted those for those two, again in the same world of lycanthrope. They will be coming out, I want to say, probably 2026, 2027.
Very nice. Well, let's get people checking this stuff out. So where can they go to, where can readers go to find you? Information about the books, the anthologies, all of that good stuff. Where can they find you?
Absolutely. So I am, they can go to Lisa D. Kastner, KASTNER.com. They can go to runningwildpublishing.com. I am also very active on Twitter, Threads, Facebook, LinkedIn. Just enter my name, I'll pop up. And we also have a couple of live streams. So actually every Thursday between 5 and 6 p.m. Pacific time, 8 and 9 p.m. Eastern time, we have again, a live stream called Run Wild with Us, Ask Us Anything. And it's myself and two of my acquisition editors. And it's an opportunity for us to, one, answer questions that we receive during the live stream, as well as questions we receive throughout the week. And also like address those, sometimes those overarching questions that people repeatedly come to us with around publishing, editing, the craft of writing. Honestly, it can be anything. And I also do, typically it's once a month, a storyteller's happy hour. It's myself and one of our authors whose work, Teehee Hazlett, it had been named Best of the Year in like 2019, I want to say. And we basically, using prompts, we imbibe and, tell tall tales. So it's a very fun way to engage. And that is, again, that's across all the platforms I already mentioned, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, actually Instagram and YouTube as well. So if you search on it, it's another one that should pop up.
Excellent. Well, if people want to purchase a copy of your books, Cure or Family Pack, those are the two that are out, where can they go to buy them?
I request to either go to your local bookseller. They should have if they don't have it on hand, they have the ability to purchase it because we are with a major distributor in North America. They can also, if they want to go online, they can go to bookshop.org. If they also look at Mysterious Galaxy Bookstore, it's one of my favorite bookstores in San Diego. I know they have my books on hand, and they are very, very happy if you want to have me sign it or have it, some kind of transcription to it or so on. They're more than happy to forward that on. And I'm usually there, I want to say like once a month, something like that. And we also have the audiobooks available on Audible. And I believe it's on, I always mix up Hulu and Kobo for no logical reason whatsoever, but our audiobooks are available on Audible.
Great. Okay. Well, Lisa, it sounds like you are going to be very busy for quite a while. So I want to say congratulations on Cure and Family Pack. And we will look forward to War Dogs, the third installment, plus the anthologies, Incurable, and those to follow. So again, congratulations on everything you've accomplished so far, and best of luck with the rest of your writing journey.
Thank you. And thank you for taking the time to chat. This has been amazing. I really appreciate it.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published, as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author, or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, Find a new author and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the bookshop at the end of the internet.